As an agent, you will jump in and typically be met with a screen that looks like this in Jira. And this is sort of the For You page. Personally, I actually almost never look at this. I find it almost irrelevant to look at this particular page. I always navigate to the project that I'm going to be working out of. So I'll go over the project and the sidebar in a moment, but really I just head over to this little drop down, click it, and then I find what I need to in order to go to the project that I need. And if you can't find it in here, if you're brand new, maybe logged into Jira for the first time, there's a little view all projects button, and that'll take you to like a full list, comprehensive list of every single project that you have in your Jira environment. From here, you could go through and search, find. Oftentimes you'll be sent a link to the specific project that you need to access. And because this is a JSM specific training, if we want to find all the JSM type projects in Jira, we could click this little product drop down and search for Jira Service Management, check that box, and now all of our Jira Service Management projects pop up. This will make it a little bit easier to find the right one if you don't know which one that you're looking for. So I'll be using the IT operations project for the demo of this tutorial. And once you do find the right project and you're either looking at this screen or you're inside the project, always make sure you star it. The moment you start it, it just jumps right into your side panel. So I'll do security operations next, and you'll see that it actually gets added right here. And now anytime I open up the little projects tab, the most relevant things that I need that are useful for me are going to show up here immediately. So yeah, this is like the number one thing I would use when you're looking at projects. It's the most relevant thing because usually you're working out of 3, 4. I work out of maybe 5 or 6 total projects in my own Jira environment. So I just star all of those and they're super easy to see. I don't have to go digging through things later. And if I ever do need to find a new project, I just go to view all projects and search for it manually. So immediately do that. That's kind of step one when you jump in. That way, when you jump into Jira, then the next time you click the little drop down, find the project you need, you go here, you have everything at your fingertips without digging through more settings and menus. Okay, so the rest of these sidebars, I'm going to cover them really quick. So there's a recents, which will open like your projects, your different work items and tickets. If you wanted to see those, again, I actually don't use this almost ever. You could also see your starred, which once again, I actually almost never use this. You may find this a little bit more relevant if you're starring certain projects, filters, dashboards. You can use this to kind of see that all in one quick snapshot. I find that when I start to do this, it starts to get a little bit overwhelming, and I like them like ordered and structured in a specific way. So I'll just typically open a project and see my starred projects here. I'll typically go to filters or dashboards and see my starred filters and dashboards. So I pretty much don't use any of those options. Below that, we have our apps, and these are pretty common for any extensions or anything that your team has installed. Sometimes these are relevant to agents when they need to do specific things. So like Tempo, you might be able to go in and log and track time. You might have access to that. For the most part, these are used for like backend or Jira admin settings. So more often than not, you probably won't need to jump in here. And even like the planning time, tracking time, all that, it's done on the ticket itself. So you most of the time don't actually need to access these apps. And as I'm going through these, you could customize your own sidebar and like remove whatever you don't want. That way it's nice and clean. You could also reorganize and actually go through, list things whatever order you'd like to. I'll show you my preferred way to organize these because it makes it a little bit simpler. So I'll typically turn all these off. Unfortunately, you can't turn off the For You because that's sort of the home page, even though I never use it. But I typically like to see my apps, sometimes my roadmaps, depending on what type of Jira environment that I'm using. I will typically hide either roadmaps or plans. So I might use plans or roadmaps. They're very similar. And then we have projects, filters, dashboards. I'll turn off operations and teams. Those are like very specific to alerting, change management. And then teams are relevant for some organizations that use them. If you use them, great. Like you can go to your teams, check out the teams that you have here. If you're an agent, most of the time you won't actually need this. Teams are mostly handled on the work items, and this is sort of just a place to see who's a part of which team and see a little bit more information about it. So yeah, going back to my sidebar. Let me head all the way back. There we go. So I like to clean this up, keep it very simple for myself, and pretty much use only what's necessary. I'll cover filters and dashboards in a little bit because they get a little bit more specific to use cases that I like to use on a daily basis. But next, let's jump into our project. So once you have your project started and you know what you're working out of, once you open that up, you'll typically have a list of things on the left sidebar. Really, the most important one for you is going to be queues. Queues are going to show you exactly what you need to work on. And we'll dive into like a column management, sorting, the actual work item view in a moment, and how to work tickets. But this is going to be where you typically work out of. And same process here as before. Once you find a good relevant queue, make sure you star it. Just star the queue, have it available at your fingertips. Otherwise, you'll start searching through like a bunch of queues and a bunch more panels, and it takes several clicks every time you want to find the correct queue that you're in. Oftentimes, what I'll even do is I'll just bookmark this page directly. So I'll go through, bookmark this inside of my browser. I click on it, and boom, my most relevant queue with the most relevant project shows up right in front of me. I don't have to go dig through menus, dig through a bunch of different stuff. I click one button, immediately I am on the correct page that I need to be on to start working on my tickets right away. So the less time you kind of spend working through and like trying to find where you're working out of, the better. There's a lot of UX decisions that Jira and Atlassian have made that made it a little bit challenging to like find exactly what you need. But once you have it and you bookmark it, it makes it really easy. So the most prominent queues that I would tend to use are really these three. The first one being all open tickets. This gives you a snapshot of like everything that needs to be done. And there's a couple that are actually set up incorrectly here. And they're not filtered correctly. But for the most part, your admins should have done a good job of setting these up. And once something is resolved, it disappears, which means that anything in this queue is still outstanding, period. So it's something that is not done and needs to be addressed. And sometimes inside of these queues, you'll already have assignees. You'll already have people working these tickets in different statuses. But it gives you a really good idea of like the total amount of tickets that are still open that have not been completed yet. And in this case, we have 22, but it gives you a really good like bird's eye glance of like, okay, I have 200 tickets or I have 20 tickets. And you could see exactly who's working on what statuses they're in. This is also super helpful for like an admin or a manager to see this view, and at a very quick glance, you could see exactly what's going on. The next one is all my tickets. And this is phenomenal for anything that you're assigned to. And typically this is a dynamic queue. So if it's all my tickets, anyone who's logged in, so I'm logged in as me, I'm going to see all my tickets that are assigned to me. So I'll go through, pick up one more task, assign it to me. And what's great about this is that now when I look at my open tickets or all open tickets, I'll go through, find what needs to be worked on. The moment I assign it to myself, it shows up in my queue. So now I could revisit this queue anytime I need to work on my work items that are either open, that I'm assigned to, that are in progress, and I know exactly where to find them. And if something's in progress or outstanding and it's related to what I'm doing, it's immediately going to be in this queue. So your open tickets are like where you go to find what you need to work on. And these might be named something a little bit different, but every single queue should have something generally similar to this, like all open tickets or all unassigned tickets. And then once you start grabbing them, you should always have a queue for yourself to see everything that's related to you and you only. That way you know exactly what you're working on. And then there's one last queue that I like to suggest starring or having at a quick glance is your all completed or closed tickets. And this is great because you might have resolved something recently and maybe you need to go back, add a quick note because something else came up. Maybe you resolved something recently a couple days ago and you have a new ticket that showed up that's very similar, and you just want to jump back in there and see exactly what you did for that ticket. So having this all resolved queue just gives you the ability to go through, find everything that was done, jump in and reference that information for a little bit later. You can view your comments and everything else within that queue. The one other way I like to do this is by going to my filtered search. And most of the time, that's actually the approach that I would take because it's very difficult to go through this list and find exactly what you're looking for. Whereas if you go to the filter search, which you could get to by going to your filters on the left sidebar and then searching for all work items, or you could just open this queue up directly in a filtered view by clicking this little icon on the right. And what that does is it opens up this screen. And this screen is what Jira calls the filtered view, or like your all ticket view. And this brings in tickets in your Jira environment from everywhere, from every project that you have access to with every status. Like literally everything that you have in your Jira environment will be pulled into here. And what's really great about this view is that we can now filter down and get very, very specific on what we want to find. So right now we're looking at things that are unresolved, and some of these are incorrect. So if I wanted to find something in, like, let's say just the done statuses, I could go in and specify that. So now I'm looking at just done statuses. Now we have 127 tickets total. Let's say I want to pull in assignee is Mitch Davis. I'll go in, search for assignee, or sorry, I'll search for Mitch Davis. That's what I should be searching for. Now we're going to jump down to 114 tickets, and we can keep filtering down to find exactly what we need. Maybe something we've worked on in the past, maybe something relevant. And you could filter by any field in Jira. So any field you've ever set, any field you've ever used, you can filter. And if you don't see it at the top level here, you could go under the more filters and find it. You can see there's a total of 200, and I could search for something specific like updated date, and I could pull that in, and now I have an updated date that I could filter by. So any field you've ever set, any field you've ever used, you can use to filter in this view. We also have a JQL view, and what I personally like to do to learn JQL is to just set up a couple of basic filters as I did here, and then you switch to JQL, and it gives you the exact JQL formula that you've used. And this is a really great way to kind of get used to and understand how to use JQL. And JQL is really important because it gets you a lot finer and more granular results. So if, for example, I wanted to see things that are very specific, or instead of doing like, I want to see project ITO and resolution does not equal unresolved, I could switch this to an or. And that gives me an entirely different result than what I would have seen before. So there's a lot more powerful things that you could do in JQL, and this is not a JQL course, but you could look into, there's a lot of documentation about this that you can check out that'll give you a lot of really good context on how to use it. And you can see that if I made a change that's actually not supported in the basic view, it doesn't actually let me switch back. And that just means it's too complex of a query that I entered in that I cannot use anymore inside of the basic searcher. So if I go back and put an and once again, the basic search pops up. And the last thing that I want to show you here in the view is the keyword search. And for example, if I'm looking for test node, I could type that in, and now it pulls in and indexes based on keyword all the relevant things that I want to see. And you'll also see that it's pulling in some random stuff that I may not want. So you could actually use parentheses or not parentheses, you could use quotations. Oh, that kind of broke something. Let me go back to basic. So when you're doing this, there we go, back to basic. So you could actually put quotations on your text. So I'll type in test node once again, test node. It keeps switching for me. Let me try it in here inside of the JQL. Test node, and let's try to accept that. So that should give me the keyword based on exactly what I'm searching for based on that text. So instead of just taking each word, which it does when you don't quote them, it takes the full, or the phrases individually, the words individually. So anything that has a test or anything that has a node is automatically pulled in. If we put those quotations around it, and I don't know why it's switching to JQL, it usually doesn't do that. Might be a little bit of a bug in Jira. But once we do those quotations, it automatically pulls in only things that say test node in sequence. So just a little trick for you there, because oftentimes I see agents searching for something based on keyword or phrase, and they type in a few words and they get so many different results when they could just add a couple of quotations and you get a much finer and relevant results shown to you. So that's definitely one thing that I would do. And something that I look for, or something that I do very regularly, is just search for exactly what I need inside of this basic search inside of Jira. It gives me a very easy and simple way to find exactly what I'm looking for, especially if you have a ton of things coming in that you've resolved in the past that aren't showing up in your queues. So that's going to be your queues, and the 3 simple queues that I like to use inside of every Jira environment. You'll see that there's other options here on the sidebar. There's things like service requests, incidents, problems, and changes. This is really just your primary queues, but filtered down to each different issue type. And issue types are defined right here. Like if you hover over one of these or open one of them up, you have a little icon. This is like a service request. This red one is an incident, and I'll cover what they are and how they work a little bit later. But I pretty much never use these myself because I just like to see an overarching queue of all my incidents, all my problems, all my service requests in one place. There is a time and place for these if you wanted to see only those specific items. That being said, I just don't ever recommend using them because I'd rather just see all of my open tickets regardless of what kind of a request it is. So that's our queue management and how I typically like to set those up. We also have some reports in here. These may or may not be available to you, some of them depending on who you are and like if you have admin access. If you're an agent, you're probably not going to be looking at these. So I'm going to skip over these and save them for the part 3 of this series. And then we have a couple of other things. I'll cover the ones that are relevant and most important, one of which is knowledge base. Knowledge base is like your knowledge docs. And if you're familiar with Confluence, it's another Atlassian product that is very tightly integrated with Jira. And this is very similar to your typical knowledge base or knowledge setup that you'll have. And ththese articles most of the time, not only show up for you, but also for your customers. So inside of your portal, you'll typically see customers submitting these or viewing these knowledge-based articles so that they could self-help or self-resolve without needing to submit a ticket. So you could also see these and any of the private ones to you. You You could create articles, reference articles, really do anything here to link these and find like typical solutions. Then we have a customers tab, and this sometimes is used, sometimes is not. This is a lot more relevant for like customers and organizations that have external users using the portal and submitting requests. What I mean by external users is like if you're an IT team, you're probably not having any kind of external tickets coming in from organizations you work with. Let's say your customer support team, though, in that case, you might have like 10 different companies or 100 different companies that submit tickets to you as a support team that you resolve. So in those scenarios, you could see those organizations, you could see that list of customers and kind of see how many open requests they are. And this is still relevant for internal teams. I just find myself not using them very often, but you can like go into like each of these individual ones to see how many tickets and requests they have open under each user. And then below that, last thing I'm going to cover here is the channels. And this is really just our way of seeing what ways of submitting tickets we have. And right now we have an email setup, then we also have a portal, and then there's a widget and a chat option that are off. And there's a little channel access here as well, which just means that all customers are able to submit requests. So how do we actually create work items here, or how do customers create them, and how can we create them as well? So the first way that we have is the portal. We also have the email, which is automatic, and I'm sure all of you are familiar that you send an email, you get a new ticket. That's pretty common. I do want to cover the portal because that is a little bit more unique with Jira in some cases. So the portal will look a little bit something like this, and you typically have, let me pull up a more relevant one. You typically have something that is going to show you different groups and request types to submit. And when you click on one of those, you'll typically have a form that you need to submit for the request to go through. So the customer will go in here, typically fill out something like what problems are you having, add some more details, any more relevant information, and then they go through and send that request in. So these forms are typically built by admins in Jira and should have the most relevant information to you for you to be able to do your job. And they could go through and like submit, something specific to them, reporting broken hardware, asking a question, requesting a new laptop, etc. Depending on what you set up in your own environment, those are the options that you are going to have. So that's what that looks like. And if we're an agent, I think I wasn't sharing my screen. It's going to look a little bit something like this, where you go through and set up the specific logic and forms and fields inside of Jira. They go through and fill these out depending on what requests that they have. And in some cases, I'll show you like that conditional logic. Depending on which fields I select, it's going to show and remove certain fields for them, making it a little bit easier to submit. So that's how customers go through and submit a request on the portal. For agents, you have two options. You could either use the same portal to submit a request. Oftentimes you might have like a walk-up, or you might have a Slack message or an email, or just a general thing that you need to create to make sure it's tracked inside of the system. So whenever you create those, you can either do it here in the portal just as a customer. The second option, though, is on the back end when we hit the create button at the top. And this process actually looks pretty similar, where you click on the request type, you select what you want to submit. So let me pull in something that might be relevant. Fix an account problem. You have the fields that are relevant showing up for you. And then once you have these fields showing up, you fill them out, same as the customer would, and you hit create. The one caveat here is that it doesn't work very well with forms, and it doesn't show you conditional logic here. So if your forms have a lot of conditional logic and you want very specific information submitted, I would tend to use the portal for that. But I would probably focus on structuring these and just showing the correct and relevant fields for an agent to submit these requests. And it's really as simple as hitting the request type dropdown, selecting what's most relevant to create, filling out the fields, and hitting create. So we've actually walked through that really quick. Also, I'll type in a summary. I need a new account for Michael Scott. So Michael Scott might be joining the company, and we need a new account created. We'll select a system, Active Directory, maybe HR services, and then any other relevant information. We hit create, and a work item is now created. And if we want to see it immediately, we could click this button here to view request a new account, which is what we just submitted. And that takes us immediately to the work item page. So before I cover this, I want to take a look at the queues view, because that's probably going to be what you're looking at most. And when these queues are set up by your admins, most of the time, if they're set up correctly, your most relevant things should be surfacing and floating to the top. And typically this would be based on your response time for like first resolution or time to resolution, so your SLAs. And typically the most relevant thing will be at the top for you. So when you jump into a queue like this, you'll probably just go through and like pick up the things that are at the very top. And as I went over earlier, we have like different request types and issue types, and those are structured in a very specific way in Jira. The issue types are like these little icons, and they specify the type of request that's being submitted. So really it boils down to a few, but for the most part, the most common ones you are going to see are request, incident, and then any others. Sometimes it'll be a task, sometimes change management, but it's really mostly incident and incident and service request. A service request is going to be anything that's like, I need something new, I need a new piece of software, I need access to this, I need building access. Like that's all requests. Incidents is something that occurred or happened. So incidents are typically going to be higher priority by default because it means something is down. So an incident could be my laptop is broken, I can't access something, my VPN is down, something that occurred or happened that caused a problem. That's going to be an incident. And again, just due to the nature of the way that these are submitted and the definitions of them, incidents tend to be higher priority because usually when someone's requesting something, they already didn't have access to it, and waiting a little bit longer probably won't hurt them very much. Whereas somebody had access to something and it went down and they cannot do their job potentially. So just due to the nature, typically those are going to be higher priority. And you can actually see these in the work type depending on what you hit. And it automatically changes based on the request type that you select. And request type are sort of subgroups or subcategories of service requests. So as I mentioned, like my laptop is broken, requesting a new account, things like that are defined and automatically associated with a service request. So if I pull in request a new account, it switches to service request because that is a service request. If I pull up emailed request, looks like that one also a service request. Fix an account problem. Let's see, one of these should show up as an incident. Let's see, escalate an issue maybe. There we go. So depending on what you select, and this is going to be preset by your admin, it's going to automatically select the work type. So I would tend not to worry about selecting that and making sure it's accurate. I would just go through and make sure that you're using the correct request type. So once you select that, you fill out your form, you're good to go. So those are the two definitions or like way of categorizing tasks in Jira. And when I actually open a request, you'll see that all of those fields and all of that information is stored within the request itself. So on the top left, you'll see the little icon that we saw earlier. You could hover over it. It'll tell you exactly what it is. In this case, it is an incident. And then we can take a look at the request type, which is stored on the right side. So this is a report, a system issue request type. And in the case that this was submitted incorrectly, we could go through and actually change this. So we could change this to escalate an issue. And if we can't find what we need here, that's usually because it's the wrong issue type. And for example, like escalate an issue and report a system issue are both incidents. But because we're under the incident umbrella, we actually can't switch these to a service request. So if something does come in incorrectly and we need to recategorize it, we check with the request type first. If it's not there, we click this little red icon and then change it to one of these. So in this case, it's going to be a service request. I will click on that. It'll take me through a really quick screen to make sure that I change it to the correct thing. We're going to leave it in the same project. Status mapping, we'll just make sure that open, waiting for support, those are the same, because you'll oftentimes have different workflows between them. We'll leave this field empty and we'll confirm the changes. And then our change officially goes through. And once we have this change, you could now click on the request type and we'll see the different list of options that are now associated with our service request. So we could go through and change them at this point. So this whole view here allows us to see the requests that were submitted from the customer, either via email, via a portal, whatever other method, maybe chat, is submitted by, and then we could see the summary, the very top right. That's the most important thing. That's the thing that we see in our queues. And below that, we see all the details that were submitted with and associated with that request. So description, environment, anything else that was submitted along with that. Let me hide this tempo because we're not going to go over that. That's just a plugin. And then on the top right, we have what are called our statuses. And when you start working on your Jira tickets, you start working through and setting a status. So once it's in progress, you set it to in progress. At some point, it goes into waiting for support, so on and so forth. And you just go through and change these statuses if you need to. Sometimes there are required fields when you switch statuses. And then eventually, when you're done working with something, you just set it to either canceled or resolved. Most of the time resolved unless it was canceled for some reason. And again, sometimes we have required fields. In this case, we have a resolution that we need to set. We can add a comment if we'd like, and we resolve this work item. Now that it's resolved, it's done, and it should disappear from our queues. In this case, the resolution was set, which means that the issue or the work item did disappear from the queues of all open or like all my work requests, and it'll immediately get moved to all the closed tickets. So a couple of things here that I wanted to cover as well is you have your context fields on the right side. So your SLAs, and then like things like assignee, request type, knowledge base, organizations. These are all more context and general fields that you can use to categorize, get more specific with your requests. This really helps with reporting later on as well. And if you want to change assignees from here, all you have to do is click on that. Same thing with the rest of these fields. The other most critical piece here is really your communication with the agents. And that all happens in this panel down here. And it really mostly happens through the comments. The others are really related to like what happens on the work item. So the history actually tells you what changes were made here and by who. So you can see that I changed this to work from in progress to resolved. It tells you who made this change and when. That way you actually have an audit log of it. And you also see customers making changes here as well. And then you have work logs, which is like tracking work. External shares an app. Feedback is any kind of feedback that you received for this. Approvals, associate approvals, if you have those as well. Really, for the most part, you're going to be looking at comments and history if you want to see like what happened to this ticket and who made those changes. Now, when it comes to comments, this is how you communicate with the customer. So something gets submitted, you have two options. You could add internal notes and you could reply to a customer. If I reply to a customer, this is going to go directly to them on the portal, but also send out an email notification. So I could say something like, hey, got it, I am working on it. And we'll send this out. And now the agent or the customer that submitted this knows that I've seen this request, I'm working on it, and it's currently in progress. We've made a notification to them to let them know that things are moving. So that's our first option. We reply to customer. Customers can reply to us by responding to the email or going to the portal. And we could keep having a flow of conversation here. If we need to request more information, if we have any questions, if they have any questions, they could drop those comments and emails, and everything shows up in this thread. Nothing is done outside of Jira, unless you're maybe doing it in person or like over Slack, in which case I would add those as internal notes or comments to add that context into here. So an internal note example might be like, I fixed the laptop or something in person on site. Here is what I did. And then you kind of list out, maybe the things that you worked on or the things that you've changed to fix that laptop. That way the team knows and you have enough context here to show exactly what you did and what resolved the problem. So you drop that internal note, and what this does is it just stores a note on the work item and does not notify the customer. That way you could have like internal conversations here, like I could add notes to my manager, to anyone else. Like if I want to tag Jennifer, say, hey, can you help with this? So everything is stored and associated in terms of activity, conversation, things that happen on this ticket and on this work item. And this makes it really easy to then later, once this is closed and resolved and you want to like reference this a year later, you could go in here and you see all the context stored in one place on one ticket rather than in a whole bunch of different places. So that's really how we go through and work through our work items. There's a couple of other features that are pretty useful here that I like to use myself. One of which is subtasks. These are really great for like maybe chunking out work a little bit more. And once I go through these, or like once I go through a ticket and think like maybe I need 3 different action steps to resolve something, I might create those as subtasks. So I'll test this out, test subtask 1, I'll create this. And now we have a new subtask that gets shown. And I could go through, and this is sort of like a mini Jira ticket, and I could actually resolve these as I go through and complete them. Oftentimes you might have these automatically generated depending on the request type. Like if you have an onboarding that shows up, you might have like a list of subtasks that needs to be completed. Now, the alternative to this is actually a checklist. And this is done in the form of an app typically. And in this case, I'm using Power Tools for Jira. It gives you a ton of really great features like checklists. And these are sort of like less formal and more like a one-click close. So I'll type in quick test checklist and add this over. We could also do the same thing where we just check it closed. We can mark it in progress, but it's sort of like a lightweight version of a subtask. And it's something that I like to use pretty often when a subtask feels like it's a little bit too much, because you could open up a subtask, you can have its own field, its own information, and sometimes it feels like a little bit too much. And sometimes what I like to do is actually add a subtask, and then because we can't add anything below a subtask, you could use checklists in here to also have like another subcategory inside of your subtask. So it gets a little inception-y where you have like your checklist in a subtask, and then you have your work item, and then your epics, and a lot of all that other cool stuff. So that's one thing that I really like to do here whenever I like to chunk out my work. The other thing is linking your work items. And this is super relevant for like if you have a duplicate, if you have something that's generally associated with another ticket in your project, or if you want to associate it with other projects and other tickets from other places. So all you do is click the link work item, and then you search for or find whatever you need to. You click it in here, and then you select the type of link that it is. So it could be an escalation, it could be a merged, it could be anything else. This list is very long. Usually it's not this long, but let's just say it's a clone. And then we add this link in, and it happens to create a two-way link between both tickets. So if I go into this ticket, you'll see that it creates a link back to my ITO project to this ticket both ways. And it gives the individual who's looking at the other ticket all the context of like where the resolution is, where the status is, who's assigned to it, and they could also jump into it and immediately get into this task here. So linking tickets is really great. It's also great for merging tickets. There's no native merging ticket out of the box with Jira, unfortunately. So that's one way to do it. You could do it manually. Power Tools for Jira also gives you the ability to merge work items, which is a pretty cool feature. So check that out if you're interested, because it does give you a little bit more functionality in Jira Service Management to be able to do certain things like merge, add checklists, even show like time and status tracking where you see exactly how long something's been open and in a particular task. Now, the one other thing that I will show here, because there's so many questions about like, how do we get a reminder? How do we reopen this at a certain time? The Power Tools for Jira also adds that. So it allows us to create a reminder and ping or reopen or tag someone in the comments and send a notification at a specific date and time. So there's a couple of preset options. So like if I want to do something in an hour, I could drop specific users that I wanted to tag, drop a specific message, and I could even add transitions. So something's open, I could reopen it, tag someone, remind myself later, do all that sorts of cool stuff. That's a big pain point in Jira because there's no like reminders features out of box. So that is available in Jira Power Tools. Okay, so that pretty much covers the full life cycle. And again, I'll do a quick recap. I would highly suggest you sort of clean up your sidebar, make it very easy and simple for you to navigate and find what you need quickly and easily. You want to star your projects in any relevant things like boards, filters, dashboards. And then you want to star your queues and then bookmark ideally a queue that you could jump into, find, and start working on immediately. So in this case, it would be like an all my open tickets or all open tickets queue. Anything at the top I need to jump on. So I might already be assigned to one. I jump in here. I start working through a ticket by putting it in progress, escalating it, whatever needs to be done, start communicating with the agent. And from there, I can close it out and wrap it up. Once it's closed, it gets removed from the queue, and I repeat that same process again as an agent, going through and resolving requests. Starting out with the project creation process. As an admin, you should have the ability to create new projects, particularly company managed, which I'll cover in a moment. But to do that, all we do is hover over the projects on the left side, and we click the little plus icon. That brings us to this project template screen. And this screen, in my opinion, is super confusing and very hard to figure out what you actually need. I find that these sections of like different teams aren't very relevant to most and have way too many options to be useful. So I actually just skip every single one of these and go straight to the product. And the reason these are partially so confusing is that let's say you're an IT team and you click on IT, and actually that's a bad example. Let's say you're an HR team and we click on HR. You have different products here. We have Jira Service Management, which is what we want to create, but then we have other project types, which are just Jira projects. Sometimes we even have product discovery projects here, and it makes it a little bit more confusing because it's not very easy to see which product type we're creating. So I just skip all of that and go straight to Jira Service Management. And a lot of those different templates or groups don't actually have blank project in them either, which is what I recommend creating. And the reason I recommend a blank project is because every single one of these is sort of pre-created to have a specific set of request types, portal groups, and I'll explain what those are in a moment. And if you don't need them, it takes quite a while to actually clean them up and not use them anymore. That being said, I do recommend them if you're not very familiar with Jira, just to like create a quick sample project, get an understanding of how Jira works, like a basic IT service management project or a general service management or even HR. Get a really good basic understanding of like, how does Jira actually function? What is the ideal setup look like? Because a lot of those things are really good for best practice learning, and it gives you really good understanding of like what a more completed version of the project will be. That being said, 99% of the time, I will choose blank project. And really the only difference between these is just the toggles and the features that are enabled and disabled on the back end. And I'll show you exactly how to change those in a little bit, but also the preset and pre-configured data that's going to be available in it. So again, that cleanup takes a while and we could always change the features on our own. So I always choose blank project. Then we hit create blank project, and we're going to always want to select company managed. I almost never recommend team managed projects, especially when it comes to JSM and Jira Service Management, because you're going to be way more limited with team managed in terms of the way you could integrate some of the features. And we work with a lot of clients in Jira. One of the biggest things that happens is that teams start to use a team managed project. They jump in, start configuring, and then a year later, they're like, oh, we can't do this. We can't do this. We are limited in this way. And we come in and help migrate them to a company managed project. So it's going to save you a ton of headache just to go directly with company managed and not need to change that later. You do need specific permissions to do certain things in company managed projects. So ideally, you have some kind of site or org admin permissions when you're doing this. If you don't, maybe coordinate with someone who does to give you that access or to help you kind of along the process of creating this project. So I'm going to select company managed. We'll give this a name. We'll just call this general support project. And JSM is great for any teams like IT, HR, general support, even like legal, procurement, anyone who is receiving requests from a customer or an end user and triaging them, working on them, and completing them. JSM is good for any of those types of projects. The setup process is pretty simple. It's really the big change in the way these projects are structured are the way that we toggle the features on the back end, which I'll show you how to do in the project settings. We could add a key or a custom key. It generates an automatic one, and I'll leave it as that. I'll find what team type this is most relevant to. So it's going to be customer service. Channel access, I'll leave this as open. We could always change this later. You could also make it restricted. That way only specific people that you specifically invite can submit requests to this project. We can share settings with an existing project. I don't find this very relevant. It works a lot better with Jira projects. Unless you have another project that you're trying to model specifically with like issue types and workflows, I wouldn't select that button. So then we create our project, and that's the process that I typically use to go through and actually create my very first JSM project. I don't go with any of those templates. I always select company managed, and then I go through and actually start configuring the project from here. I don't really like to use any of these templated options because, again, there's a reason we selected blank. If we wanted some templates, we would have done that earlier inside of the templated projects. These can be useful sometimes if they're relevant, but most of the time, when you're going to be using one of these, you're going to want custom and specific information inside of your request types. So I would just continue to the project and skip this for now. Now, we already went over like the agent training, how to use Jira, how to go through triage tickets, the Jira interface and all that. So all of that is covered in the Jira training section. I'm going to be going over mostly the configuration and like the backend setup of how do we get these features to run or be used in a very specific way. And the first thing that we need to do when we create a new project is go over to our project settings and make sure that the right people have access to it. And that's going to be done under the Access tab, as you may have guessed. And there's a couple of options in here that we want to look at to make sure the correct people have access to the correct things. So usually you're going to have a couple of roles, either out of box or ones that you could set up inside of Jira. And you could easily add people by clicking this add people, adding in an email. So I'll just drop in an example here. And then you select a role that is going to be applied to this project. For the most part, I would bucket these into like 3, maybe 4 different categories. You have your project admin, which is typically you. You're going to have access to all the backend settings, configurations, like workflow management, request type management, portal configuration. That's the admin role. Then you have the agent role or like the service desk team role. And that's specific to like someone submits a request, they triage it, they work on it, they add comments, they resolve it. That's the team role. And then we have the customer role. And this is anyone submitting the request, but not having access to actually triaging and working on them. And one thing to note here is that the customer role is actually free. Every other role here is going to be paid. If you have any backend access to JSM, that is a paid license, whereas the customer role is always free. So that's one thing to keep in mind. You could have unlimited customers, and if you have 2 agents, you're only paying for 2 agents, which is awesome within Jira. The other thing that I'll mention is like maybe a member role or a viewer role. Sometimes you want someone to like just jump in, have view access to things, but not manage or triage tickets or like work through them, change statuses, add comments, just a viewing ability. So those are the core roles that I would assign when using the role selector. And I'll show you how to manage each of these permissions. But essentially all we need to do once those permissions are set up is we go in here, we make sure that we select the right person, and we go in and select like, okay, this individual is going to be a customer or a service desk team member. I click on add, and then that role should just get added in a second. And now we have the user with the particular role that that user is assigned to. And once their permissions are set up, all we do is like manage those users and their roles by going to this people and access section and adding people manually. And if you want to see exactly what these granular permissions are, who has access to what, that's all in the project permissions tab. And we could go to actions and then edit permissions on the top right. And this is where we could actually add and remove and like see who has access to what. And you could scroll through this. I'm going to have a little bit of a longer list because I have a lot of plugins on this site. I was doing some testing here, but really the core permissions are things like creating issues, editing issues, archiving, obviously things like adding comments. You could scroll through and like see exactly who has access to what. So you could grant to add comments can be done by administrators, by service desk team, and by service project customers portal access. So anyone who has portal access, anyone who is a service desk team member and an administrator. You could ignore this permission here because it's typically used for plugins, and you shouldn't remove them because that can break certain things in your Jira environment. But other than that, you can look at what has access to what. And if you want to add access to a particular role or remove access, that's going to be done by one of these two buttons. If you click update, you could add access to a project role or even like a group or specific user if you'd like. I typically recommend doing it by the project role, but you can use any of these other options as well. And if you want to remove access, you click remove, you select which ones you want to remove, and then you click remove, and that strips that access from those users. So that's how we manage and set up our actual roles. Once those are set up, usually it's a one-time thing. Your projects are good to go in terms of permissions, and all you do is go in and add users and manage the role that they actually have. So that's pretty much all you need to know for like the actual agent access. The other big part of this is the customer access. So you set up the agent and like admin access and who gets access to what in terms of your internal team. But for customers, that's going to be managed inside of the customer permission section. And there's really two things to look at here. There's not much in this section. There's more settings, which I'll show you in a sec. But the big thing here is what we saw earlier with open versus restricted. And this is essentially just like open project. Anybody who has access to Jira has access to this project. Versus restricted is specific to the customers added to this project. So we saw earlier the people and access. If we set this to open, it doesn't matter if they're added to this group or not. They will see this on the portal and be able to submit email requests into this project, regardless of if they're added here or not. Versus if we add a user and then select a customer role, and I'll add a Ryan here for an example. And now we have Ryan, and if I go to customer permissions, I can restrict it to only those added directly to this project. And now in this scenario, because Ryan is the only customer, obviously agents can also submit, but because Ryan is the only customer, he's the only one that could submit requests to this portal. So this is great to like hide or like remove permissions from certain people or certain teams or certain groups from submitting your requests into a portal like this. You can do that for a variety of reasons, like maybe this portal is only meant for executives or other team members. You don't want it for the whole company. That's the scenario that you would typically use a restricted portal in. If you're like an IT team, an HR team, a customer support team, you'll typically leave this open. And for the most part, I see this left as open for most teams. The other thing is customer sharing. And this by default, it should be a good permission, but this allows to share or like view tickets from other team members, either within the same organization or like within the same project, or manually entering the email address of others in their project. So you could go through and kind of like figure out which permission is going to be best for you. But those are really the two primary options that you need to worry about in terms of access for customers. The other thing I'll show you is particularly located inside of the global settings. And these global settings are only available to org or site admin access. So you may not have access to this. You may need to work with the site admin for this, but this essentially allows you to add specific domains, to allow customers to create accounts, get a little bit more granular and specific with portals. And the reason this is locked down to site admins is because it affects every single JSM project, not just yours. just your project is going to be inside of this particular page and settings page. The other settings are affecting every Jira Service Management project. So they're logged down to like the org and site admin roles to actually manage them. So that's going to be our full access breakdown. We created our project. We make sure that the right people, agents, and customers have access. Next, we're going to go over the way that these customers actually submit the requests, because we can control and add those options ourselves for our customers. And that's going to be under our channel and self-service options. The two biggest ones here that are going to matter most are portal and email. These two are probably the ones that are used by almost every single company. You also have chat, which is like integrating with Slack and Teams, which is great, but you will still need to set up an email and a portal typically for this to work regardless. So if you want to use these, they're pretty easy to link. All you have to do is go through the setup options, and your projects are linked and your chat functionality is working. There is also widget if you want to use this like on a website or embed this somewhere in a product. You can do that. This is like great for collecting feature requests, bug requests, general support for like products or web apps. So this is a fantastic use case for that. Not used very often in Jira, but it is there as an option. So I'm going to cover the email and the portal setup in this demo. The email setup is fairly straightforward. You go in here, you make sure you add an external email, you select your provider, you authenticate, and then you're done. Fairly simple and straightforward. The only really big thing that we'd want to change here is potentially the request type that's being submitted with the email. And we could do that by clicking the three dots on the right side, clicking edit, and then we could go through and actually select a different request type for this particular email address. We only have one in this project, so it only lets me use this one option. But once we start adding more, and I'll cover that in a moment, it'll give us more options in a little bit. So we go through and add our email. We set up the request type that it creates. We could add multiple emails if we'd like and link them to different request types. Like if an email is sent to this email, it's going to create this request type. If it's sent to this email, it's going to create an entirely different request type. So you could kind of differentiate and categorize based on that as well if you'd like. So that's going to be your email setup. Very straightforward and simple. The bigger one here is going to be portal. And the configuration for portal is pretty straightforward. It is a little bit time consuming to actually get the setup running correctly, but it is definitely worth using. I recommend every single team to have some sort of a portal, even if your teams don't use it or aren't used to it right now. You're going to want to adopt a portal at some point. It's going to give you way more context, information, be able to collect things up front for your agents to actually resolve, and make your team way faster than just having an emailed request, because you could require certain pieces of information. You could require attachments. You could build conditional logic forms and a whole bunch more. So portal setups are pretty straightforward, and we could view the portal as it is right now by clicking this button. And that takes us to directly the portal where we see the customer's view. And as you can see here right now, there's nothing in here because we've set nothing up, because it is a blank project. So the way we start to actually set up our portal and add things is go through and give our portal a name, an introduction. We could add a logo. We can manage our permissions here a little bit as well. We could add announcements if we'd like. And then we have a tab for portal groups. Portal groups are essentially going to allow us to create different buckets or different categories for our request types. So if you think of this from an IT perspective, you could have a category for like broken equipment. Then you could have a category for requesting access. Then maybe another category for like employee turnover with onboardings and offboardings. And the reason we want to categorize is that so we don't have a list of 20 or 30 request types on one page that you have to go through, read through, find what you need. It's a lot easier to group them into buckets where it's like, oh, okay, something is broken for me. I click this link, laptop is broken, maybe peripherals are broken, or something else is not working. You have all of that under one group, and someone can easily identify, jump in there and submit the requests without digging through like a bunch of different settings in the meantime. So that's going to be our portal groups. And right now we don't have anything, even though general is showing up here, because we don't have any request types associated with it. So once we start creating our request types, kind of like what we have out of box with emailed request type, and we associate it, if we head back to the portal and refresh, we should now have a general option, or since we just have one, it just takes us directly here. But if you have multiple groups, it'll actually give you multiple group options with the request types in them. So that's going to be our portal setup, and we'll come back here and actually add these groups right after we start to set up our request types. So that's the way that customers actually submit our request. But how do we make sure that we collect the correct information during that process? All of that is done under the request management tab. And if I open that up, we have request types, we have forms, workflows, work types. All of this might seem a little bit confusing. I'm going to try to break it down as simply as I possibly can for it to make complete sense in terms of how Jira and Atlassian have set this up to work with like the actual intake process. So at the very top, we have what are called the work item types. Now, the work item types are essentially the request types that are being submitted. And I'll open up a quick IT project because it'll make a little bit more sense with their setup, just because of the way that IT projects tend to get set up. I think it makes a little bit more sense for them. So if I go in here and then I go into the work types, we have a few that are very, very common. So we have things like an incident, which is something happened or occurred. We have a service request, which is someone is requesting something or needs something. We have an access option. We have an employee setup option. And the reason that we have these as separate work types is that there's a separate workflow tied to each of these. And by workflow, all I really mean is that there's a different process for going through and like closing out one of these tickets. So if I look at incident, this is a typical incident workflow. We have an open, a work in progress, a pending, and then a resolved or like completed status. Whereas something with a multi-level approval, if someone needs access to something, you might need approval. That's going to be very different. And we need to actually send something for approval. We need to notify the application owner. And if it's denied, it goes into cancel. If it's approved, it goes into waiting for support and then completed. So those two different processes are entirely different and they demand a different workflow, which is primarily why we set up different work types or request types for these teams. And this could be very specific to you, but obviously you could have just one workflow or like one work type, or you could have multiple. Most teams that I work with, like if you're an IT team, you'll have the incident, the service request, and maybe a service request with approval. And then if you want to get really fancy, you could do things like change and problem, all that kind of stuff. Employee setup, you could go through all of those setups as well. If you're an HR team, you might have like submit a case, ask a question, might be a work item. Employee onboarding might be a separate one. Whereas if you're a general customer support team or like an intake team, you might have submit a bug as a work type. You might have a feature request. You might have like general question request. So all of those are probably going to have a slightly different workflow than the others. And I'm trying to like give as many examples as I can to make it make sense for the most amount of teams. If you're confused about that, drop it in the comments. I'll make sure to address it towards the end. But really, it's just to categorize our work in a very broad and general way. So we have our work types and our workflows, which are set up and configured together. And then all of those wrap into our service requests or request types. And our request types are typically going to be categorized. Let me head back to my other project that we were building on, general support. So request types are going to be something that we build out for our users to actually submit. So let's pretend that this particular portal is going to have a submit a bug type of request. So we could go to create and we could go with a template if we'd like. That might get you a little bit of a head start, might give you a good idea of how these work, or we could start from blank, which is also totally fine. So I'm going to say submit a bug for the name, and it'll actually show you what it looks like in the portal, which is pretty handy. So submit a bug. We could add a description if you're running into a problem, submit a bug here. That way it gives a little bit more context to what we're doing. And we could add an icon to make it a little bit more relevant. Let's see if there's a little bug in here somewhere to make it make a little bit more sense. There we go. And then we can select a portal group. We could either hide it, which is only going to be for internal agents, or show it in the general portal group. And you could add portal groups and change these later. And then we select the work type that this belongs to. So if you're thinking of, let's say, back to the IT team where we have an incident is the work item. And then below an incident, we might have things like my laptop is broken, my monitor is broken, this is down, I can't access this. Those are all incidents because it's something that occurred or happened. This is probably either a general request, or I might create a specific work type for maybe submitting a bug or bugs in general. In this case, I'll just make a general request. And if you want to keep things very simple in your portal, you could just have one or two different issue types or work types with one or two different workflows. That is totally fine. And there's nothing wrong with that. You could always expand and like branch out later. This is actually a great starting point to have something very simple, very straightforward out of the box, and then expand on and add more complicated workflows and systems in later that help you out. So I have everything set up. Let's click on add. And now my request type is created. Now, at this point, I could start adding in the types of fields and information that I want to collect with this request type. There's really two ways to do this. The first one is just by dragging in fields. And let's say that I have maybe I want to have like a start date added here. Maybe I want the description added. So I'll drag that in. And this is really just going to show, and we could actually go to a preview of this, or I could just go straight to my portal and see a preview of this. And now we have submit a bug. If I click on this, and now I have the summary, description, and start date added right here. So this is option one. We just drag in the fields we need, we pull them in, we add them to our request type, and immediately they're shown on the portal for our customers. The other option is to use a form. And a form isn't always necessary. It does something very similar to pulling in the fields as we just did, with a couple of benefits of using the form. The first one is that you have conditional logic. So with the form, we have the ability to actually, and let me pull up an example from my IT project. We actually have the ability to say, if something is filled out in a certain way, or if one field value equals something specific, only then show this section. So here's a get IT help form. And here is an example of what that may look like. So in here, we're going to have different sections. And depending on what's selected here, we're going to show different options for our customers. If I go to the preview, I could show you exactly what that looks like. So if I select my device, you could say, have you tried turning it on and off again? Just kidding. We know you've already tried everything. That's also a really good way to remind and show your customers that, maybe you should have tried something before submitting. And we have a couple of different options submitted or available to us after that. Versus system access, then we have you forgotten your password? Because that might be the most common or relevant. If I select no, we then get different fields versus yes or no, I can't log in. Then it selects or access to select specific software. So we could get very specific with our conditional logic, which is probably the biggest reason I see forms being used. The other really big reason is to have that formatting. So with those old fields that I showed where I just literally dragged them in, there's no ability to do things like this where you have some text showing up front. And you could format this text. You could add like dividers in here. You could add different headings. You could add information panels. You could add just general text like this. So you have way more formatting options inside of a form than you do inside of a standard request type. Forms are a little bit more complex and harder to set up, not by much, but I would say anytime that you're creating a new request type, and you're starting to run into issues or limitations with just pulling in general fields, that's when I start to use or consider a form. So always start with your request types, pull in the fields you need. If you feel like you're missing certain things with context on the request type, or if you're missing things inside of the conditional logic, you don't want to show too many fields, I would go with a form. So that's the process I typically use to actually decide. But yeah, I would always start with the general fields first because it's going to be super quick to drag those in and get up and running really quickly. So that's really the full process of setting up a brand new request type, making sure that we have the correct information collected during that request type from our customers. Once collected, we have all of that information ready to go for our agents to actually work on. And forms, again, really great option. There's also some template forms you could look at if you'd like. We saw some of these earlier, like conference notes, meeting notes. You could also go to IT and like have specific things for like Wi-Fi accounts, HR. Some of these actually are a pretty good starting point if you don't have like a very specific list of questions yet. So check those out and add them if you'd like. Great starting point to get those managed with your request types. So when we go back to our portal now, and I'll go back to my channel self-service portal groups, we now have the ability to add and like manage more groups here. And if I create a new portal group, let's say this is going to be problems. I'll just do something very basic. I'll add problems in here. Now I could go in and add a request type, and the only one that's relevant here is submit a bug. I could save this. Everything looks good. I could head back to my portal, and I'll make sure that I go back to my general support portal. And now I have two different groups rather than having one group with all of my request types located in one place. So I could go into problem, and now I have submit a bug. General also still has a submit a bug, so you can reuse these. And sometimes that is useful, sometimes it isn't. Then we could go through and actually submit our requests. So that's kind of the full process of getting a basic portal up and running. You still have your option of like getting requests via email and using that. But I highly recommend this portal because obviously you're collecting more context, information that you couldn't require or couldn't request over a simple email. So that's really the full setup. I won't dive too deep into workflows here because that is like a whole another topic that's very in depth. If you want more workflow related things, check out some of our YouTube videos. We have a lot of in-depth workflow related content. But yeah, just start with a basic workflow, maybe something out of box, and then you could go from there when you're attaching them to your work item types. So that's our setup of intakes. Let's go over the notifications really quick. This is specific to agents and to customers. Let me cover the customers one first because those are pretty simple. There's a list of out-of-box notifications for your customers that you could leave on or toggle off. So some of these that you see like request created or customer invited, if you don't want them to show up, toggle them off and your agent or your customers don't get a notification. And these are all email notifications, so do keep that in mind. And if you toggle these off, they will just not work or not actually fire. Whereas if they're toggled on, like with public comment added, you're going to want to make sure to keep something like that on. That way the customers are notified when there's a new update. So those are your customer options. You could edit some of the way that these emails look by editing the template or the actual wording by editing the action. So you could go into the template editor. It's HTML based. This is what it's going to look like with a link to the portal, turning off the request notifications if you'd like. But it's fairly simple to update if you'd like and turn on and off what you need and don't need. The other notifications are going to be for agents. And these are all your internal related notifications. These are also fairly simple to set up. There's quite a list of them. And these are all general actions that you'd want to see within your customer or your agents workflows, like new things are created, something is closed, comments are added. You want to get notified for those particular things. That way you actually have the ability to action on them when there's a new update on a new ticket. So kind of same process, we go through edit notifications and we could change the recipients on the right side of who we want these to send out to. So current assignee is like the person who's assigned to the work item, reporter is the person who submitted it. All the watchers are anyone who's associated with the request. And fairly simple, if you want to add or remove these, click delete or add and you're good to go. So that's pretty much a setup for notifications. Most of the time, the agent ones are out of box. I have very few moments where I've actually had to change this. Customer notifications do often need changes, and I would just run through and see what you want and don't want from these. A lot of clients that I end up working with don't want specific notifications. So I run through and actually walk them through what are best to use and what are best not to use. So those are your notifications. A couple other things I want to touch on really quickly. The features, this is like where you have the ability to enable and disable certain things in your entire project. And really, this is the difference between those templates that I showed when creating a project. I'll run through the ones that I really like to use. And a lot of these depend on the type of team that you have. So there's kind of a big asterisk on whether or not I would use these depending on the type of team that is being used in JSM. So if you're an IT team, that's pretty much the only time you'll use this first work categories panel. So if you're fielding service requests, if you're doing incident management, problem management, change management, any of those that you do, and if you're an IT team, I'm sure you're like, yes, I do that, or no, I don't do that, or I want to do that. You could easily toggle those on and off. And this lets you more easily categorize and use these as request categories or groups for your request types that get submitted. Kind of like I showed earlier with your incident as a request work type, your service request, your change, your approvals, all that is available here, and you could toggle them on and off. Views can be relevant. These are a little bit limited, and unless you have specific needs for a board view, I typically like a queue view anyway, or a calendar view, you could toggle those on. Otherwise, you could just toggle this off to clean your UI up a little bit. Post-incident review is also one of these. I don't find a lot of use cases for that one. So even if you're an IT team, I tend to leave this one off. Customer service, if you're doing any kind of specific customer service oriented things and you want to have organizational profiles and fields associated with them, this just gives you more options to do that. And you could toggle this on. Same thing with product entitlements. You could sort of assign products and add more context to specific customers. Developer escalations is also really cool if you're getting bugs submitted and this is your triage point and you need to send something to your development team. This is a great feature to enable to be able to do that. Your operations is great for things like on-call and alerting. So if you have on-call teams that are 24/7, you need very fast response times for certain things, like things go down, infrastructure goes down, products go down, and you need phone calls and text messages, Slack messages. You could set up the alerting and the on-call setups directly within Jira. This is actually taken from another product called Ops Genie that Atlassian acquired, and they've just merged it directly into JSM, and you can now enable that in these panels. Now, these work item things I tend to leave off. So you could get suggestions, you could get similar request panels. I find that they just kind of put too much context or information on the UI of the actual work item. And they just get in the way a little bit. I don't find them to be too useful. So I actually just toggle this off every time. And unless you like want to really use these, I would leave them off because it's going to clean up your UI a little bit and have less available for your agents to get lost in. Customer sentiment, I would always leave this on. This is kind of something that's on in the background and allows you to collect like a star rating for the support and work that you do. Leave this on. It gives you the ability to collect some information, even if it's not a lot, on like how happy your customers are. Playbooks are fairly new. It's another way to run automations. I don't find a ton of utility here yet. I think there will be a lot of stuff that's really great in the future that allow you to like connect with other platforms like Workday, Bamboo, and others to like launch certain automations and automation groups. So something to look out for, but right now it's pretty limited and it's nothing that you can't do with automations natively. So I would toggle that one off. Same thing with automation suggestions. I don't find it too useful or too relevant. I would typically just go into the automations, find templates that I need, or build them from scratch. Project summaries, you can leave these on. I never use these personally. So I always turn them off, and I haven't really run into many teams that find the project summary to be relevant. So I turn them off. Same thing with journeys. This is kind of very similar with your end-to-end process automation. So pretty much what you could do in automation, you could already do without journeys. So for now, I leave them off, but again, something to look out for because it is a pretty new feature that might be really cool in the future. Default request types. This is essentially to switch from like a work item that's an incident to a service request, for example. And if you're doing that very often, if you are, you probably know exactly who you are. I would toggle this on and set a default request type for each of your work types. That way, let's say if you switch from incident to service request or from task to general support, you could set a default for Atlassian or Jira to pick whenever that action actually happens. So highly recommended if you're doing that kind of transition very often. So automation is also very powerful. If you're new to Jira, this is kind of how we do anything that's automated. For example, auto-assigning tasks like round robin, any kind of recurring tasks, anything that you want to update or automate in terms of comments, integrate with other tools. That is all done through automation. Some of the templates are actually very good. I actually use them quite a bit. For example, I could search for a template that will say auto close tickets. So let's see if something like that shows up. There we go. So if a customer, when a customer comments on a closed request, it's going to reopen it automatically. Fantastic example of an automation that is very useful, and it adds some conditions for us. It adds some information and then an action. Very useful. You will want to change this if it's a template. Make sure that your like request types and conditions are actually relevant in your statuses. But this is a really great way to like get a very quick automation up and running without doing a lot of research on like how to set up a particular automation. These templates are fantastic for that. And anything related to like ongoing, reoccurring, anything that needs to be updated on issue creation, all of that is pretty much done in Jira through automation. Every single company I've worked with, every single team I worked with leverages automation very, very heavily. That's one thing that's like is extremely powerful in Jira and one of the best reasons to use JSM over other products. So any automation needs, anything that you can automate, I would definitely look at doing that. What else do we have? So we also have AI and virtual agent. I won't dig into this too much either. The one thing I will always say is that make sure you have a knowledge base linked, no matter what. Create a Confluence space, and you could easily link this by adding a Confluence space. Even external, I definitely recommend a Confluence space. So all you have to do is create a Confluence new space, and then you link it to your Jira project, and it'll look a little bit something like this. Let me pull up the IT support one. And then your customers actually have the ability to go to the portal and pull in the articles that you've written. So you could help self-service, you could help create articles for your team to actually resolve requests faster, make things way easier for them to actually manage and resolve requests, not only for your agents, but also for your customers. So always link this. You could explore down the road your knowledge base and how it works. Looks like it's not linked on this environment, and I don't have a Confluence product set up, but in order to set that up, you click on the three dots on the top left, you go to Confluence, that opens up a new Confluence page like this, and then you can go through and actually create a new space. Looks like I already have one for engineering support, so this one should be available to link, but you create a new space. It's a very similar process to creating a new Jira project, and then you link that directly to, essentially you link that directly to your Jira project, and you could surface those articles on the portal as well as for your teams. There's also Virtual Service Agent, which is a newer product from Atlassian, but it's phenomenal for like self-resolving or using AI to help resolve requests. And this is very heavily pulled in and uses your knowledge base to help solve those requests. So if you want to use this, you have to have the knowledge base first, but this is great to like help customers self-resolve using AI agents and like, your typical AI tools. When implemented right, and like you're actually pulling the correct intents, creating the correct workflows and automations, this can easily cut like your ticket volume by 20 to 30%. Like some of the teams that we've worked with have easily gone 30% volume in reduction of tickets when actually using this virtual service agent. So super powerful, especially if you have a lot of requests that are like a little bit more entry level and a little bit more straightforward that customers could probably resolve on their own. AI is going to be able to like handle that really, really well for you. And the way that Atlassian set this up is actually really phenomenal and does a really great job of pulling that context from your knowledge bases, pulling the context from Jira, and providing real solutions. So that was kind of the first walkthrough of how to get your portal set up, how to get your project set up, how to get your request type set up, and get everything working inside of Jira as an administrator. Okay, so if you're an end user and you're using the customer portal as someone who is going to be jumping in and submitting requests, this is going to be for you. And I'm going to cover all of the visual elements, exactly how to submit a request, and then go into viewing your previously submitted requests, either open or completed ones if you ever wanted to reference them, as well as how you communicate with the agents on the back end once they are submitted. So this view here is going to be sort of the home page. This is where you start and submit and find all of the requests, the general things that you might be submitting, or the documentation that is provided by your agents and the people that are servicing your particular problem. So you'll see the search bar up here, and I'll come back to this in a little bit because I want to show you how each of these work individually. And then when we go to the search bar, it'll make a little bit more sense. I'm going to be using Service Desk as the example for this demo. So this is going to be a little bit more ITSM focused, but obviously the general concepts apply to any other type of portal, whether it's like customer support and you're submitting just a general request, or it's like an HR request or an engineering request. Really the concept, the layout, and everything else is going to be very similar. And I'll touch on a couple other portals as well. So at the very top, we have a banner. And this is typically going to be an announcement from the team that is providing you service. So if you see anything appear, typically it's curated and catered to like show you something in the moment. It might be around for a day, might be around for a week, but it gives you an announcement to kind of give you a little bit more context if something's going wrong, if something is down. So sometimes you might see like an announcement here that says, hey, XYZ platform is down. We already know that it's down. It should be up in X amount of time. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, but we're working on it. That way you kind of have a little bit more context on if something is down, or if someone is out, or if like delays are, or if there are delays, if someone from the team is out, or if the team is kind of a little bit backed up. You'll be able to see general context information right at the top. Below that, we have the very first thing which shows up for us, which are going to be documents or like general self-service Confluence docs that are available to us as customers to be able to either self-resolve, self-help, or like get general information really quickly. And honestly, this is probably one of the most useful things when they're set up correctly, because you could probably fix your own problem faster than submitting a request, going through an agent, them looking at it, them responding. By the time that happens, oftentimes you could probably, if it's a self-serviceable thing, go through and actually do it yourself. So a super quick example of that, let's say I'm trying to connect to a VPN, and I have this article right at the top that says Wi-Fi/VPN connectivity. I click on that, and now I have a couple of articles that I can look at. Now, let's say I'm using a Mac, and I have an article here specifically for a Mac VPN setup. And instead of going through and raising a request, which I'll show in just a moment, I could go into here, and I have a very simple article that I can follow to do this myself. And again, this would probably take me maybe 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes to do on my own, versus an agent who would probably respond maybe after a couple hours, if you're lucky. And then depending on the type of request it is, the urgency that it's at, how many total requests have already been submitted that day. Like this might take days to get a response from and get this VPN set up. If it's a higher urgency request, it might take maybe 30 minutes, maybe a couple of hours. So either way, if it is something you could do yourself, skim through the article, try going through the instructions and completing the request on your own, because you will actually see a faster resolution for that problem. And there's a reason that these are featured at the top and shown to you in this way, and it's because they are self-serviceable requests most of the time. Sometimes they add a little bit more context information, but usually it's going to be something very specific to solve a problem. So if you see something very relevant, device support, Wi-Fi, VPN help, software help, click on one of those, check out the article and see if it's relevant. Try walking through what you can. And if you can resolve your own requests, trust me, oftentimes it's going to be quicker than actually submitting something. That being said, there's always a use case and there's always times where we do need to submit something as a customer, in which case there's a couple of ways to do that. So there's a submit a request button right here. And if I head back to the portal or like any of these options in here where I was just looking at the specific articles, I'm still going to get that need to raise a request button right here. So it kind of follows you around wherever you are. But if I head back and I click that from any point, I now get a list of groups and request types that I can actually submit. So I'll go through and find my relevant request. Sometimes you have something like a common request or just like a general item. And I can see in here, it says Wi-Fi and VPN. It also says Wi-Fi and VPN here. So also here, but I could click on any of these that say something relevant to what I need. And I could scroll through and find that's the one I need. I'm looking for specifically VPN. These should be very simple and straightforward to understand. You shouldn't have to like read through these and be super confused. Ideally, you have a very simple portal with very easy to submit requests and very easy to digest things that you can just immediately identify and know that you're submitting the right thing. And if it's something that doesn't fall into like maybe one of these particular groups, there is a Get IT Help. And for the most part, when you submit this, it's going to be like a catch-all. And most of the time, it's going to be lower priority. So I would recommend staying away from this if you can. If there's an alternative like requesting a laptop or reporting a broken asset, you're typically going to get a faster response time for those things because they're pre-curated in a way where your agents have very specific information and know exactly what's going on with those requests. So I definitely recommend trying to find something more specific. And if you cannot, go with like the general Get IT Help or like ask a question. So those are going to be your options. And let's say that I go through and go with my VPN request. I'll go through and all I have to do as a customer here is fill out the form or the fields that are set up for me. Anything that you see with the little red asterisks means it's required. Keep in mind, raise this request on behalf of, you actually won't see this because I'm an agent. I actually see this for, because like I'm an agent, I can submit these requests on behalf of other users, but this gives you one less field to worry about. And you could just go through anything with an asterisk, you fill out. Anything without an asterisk is optional. That being said, the more context and information you provide in this request, it's going to get you a faster resolution because there's less back and forth. There's less communication that needs to happen. So do your best to pull in and add as much information for the agent to be able to resolve this with like one step. So everything should be listed here for the agent to see what's happening, see what the problem is, be able to provide a solution or resolve something, and then you're good to go. The more vague this is going to be, the longer it is going to be for you to actually get this resolved. So it is in your best interest to provide as much context and detail in these sections as possible, even if they are not required. So we'll go through and add a summary like I need to connect VPN on my MacBook. I'll actually run through and submit something very quickly. And one other thing that you actually notice here is that based on the keywords here, we have suggested articles that we saw earlier. So we now have Mac VPN set up. And if you didn't find something relevant earlier, you might find something relevant here. So just double check these articles, see if you find something here that might help you. If not, you kind of keep going through and keep filling out this request. I'm going to keep this very brief, but again, please fill this out with as much detail as you can for your own benefit. I'm just going to say I need a VPN for demo purposes. We're going to select the region, in the America region office. Let's see, let's say I'm in the Austin office. Very simple, very quick form. And all I have to do is click send. I can click cancel if I don't want to send. And once I do that, my request is submitted. Now I'm going to get taken immediately to the screen of submitted requests. And I'm going to cover this a little bit later, but as soon as I submit something, it will take me here. And I'll show you how to find the screen later in case you ever want to revisit an open request. So let's jump back into my portal homepage. And you can do that by clicking on the Help Center icon on the top left. That brings us all the way home. And if you're stuck in any of these articles or you're looking at specific things, you don't know where you are, all you have to do is click on the Help Center on the top left, This may have a different name for you. Each company has some customization here. You might have some banners. It might be a little icon, but it's always going to be on the top left. And if you click on that, it'll take you to this homepage. Now, there's a couple more ways to submit requests as a customer that might be a little bit quicker than going through and pretty much doing what I just did. The first one is going to be by looking at your recently used request forms. And if you know you submitted something recently that you need to submit again, just go through here and click on whatever you need to. It takes you directly to that form. You're good to go. So that might be one of the quickest ways. If you know you submitted something recently, and you could just go down here, click it, submit it, you're done. So that's one way to kind of get a little bit of a shortcut rather than diving through some more menus. The other option we have is with the search bar. And I wanted to demo this after I showed you the request types because it'll make a little bit more sense now. For example, if I type in VPN, I'm going to get a couple of things surfaced for me. I'm going to get the number one resources, or like the documents that we looked at earlier. So again, instead of digging through each service desk, each portal, finding out which documents they have, finding out what's relevant, what's not relevant, I might actually go through and just type in the search bar my particular problem or question, and then I'll get immediate resources that I could look at, and I get immediately taken to what I need to see. So that might save you a couple of quick clicks. If you know what you're searching for and what your keywords are, typically keywords are going to be pretty straightforward for the most part. But if you don't really know, or you aren't really sure how the projects are structured, or if you're going to be going to the correct place, maybe check out the portals first. But if you've already done some previous requests and you're pretty familiar, you know exactly what you're looking for, try the actual search bar to see if that's going to help. So I'll type in VPN again, and again, I have the resources at the very top. And then I also have an option to chat with a virtual service agent. This is really, really cool. And I'll show you this in just a moment, but it's kind of like an AI bot that also helps you resolve requests. And I think it's even better than the search bar. But the search bar is kind of option one for getting a little bit of a shortcut to what you need. And the search bar is going to be searching through everything. So it's not just searching through the service desk. It's searching through operations, through marketing services, any portals that you have here, even under the show more panel. It's going to be indexing all of that information and pulling up the most relevant thing for you. So keep that in mind, because you're not just searching through like the service desk, which might be the only portal that you may be using. That being said, like if you're an employee and you're at a company, service desk, HR, marketing services, operations, those might be very common for you. And you might be using most of the time multiple portals rather than just one. So do keep that in mind. Now, the next thing we could look at is the virtual service agent. So if I type in VPN, I have that option popping up for me right here. And you may have also seen it in here when I actually go to submit a request inside of a portal. There's an actual chat with service agent button right in front of me. And the service agent is really cool because it is not just like an AI that's going to try to resolve your problems. It's actually working on data that your team, that your IT team, your HR team, that your company put together that is trained on very specific information. So once again, I am trying to install VPN on my MacBook. So I'm just going to tell service agent I want to install a VPN. So it's going to go through, look through all of the articles inside of Confluence, index past Jira tickets, request types, everything else. And it's going to bring back the best possible answer for us. And it may ask some questions just like this. So can you please specify the device? Because the device or the process might be different based on the device. I'll just say MacBook. Let's see if it can give me an answer based on just those couple of words that I typed in. So I like doing this personally because it saves even more time than the search. Instead of going through like multiple articles, finding what I need, virtual service agent will just figure out exactly what I need based on the answers that I give to it. And then rather than just displaying the entire article for me, like I saw earlier, it's actually going to give me like a quick rundown and sort of a smaller snippet of what I need to do. And the great thing here is that not only do we get a quicker snippet, it's easier to read, easier to resolve, we can now chat with it and say like, hey, I have this specific problem. Can you help me resolve that? And as long as your IT team did a good job, which most likely they did, you'll get more answers and context on how to resolve that. So go through, try this out. And if you wanted to see the original source, that's actually linked. And if I click that, I get taken to a screen with the actual doc that I saw earlier. So that is an option if you wanted to look at the full article in its entirety and follow along there. After that, It's going to ask if this resolved your issue. And this is another reason I think Virtual Agent is a lot better than actually just going through and submitting your own requests. It's because you can say yes or no. And if I say no, let me know what wasn't helpful. It's essentially going to ask more questions and try to deduce what's happening and try to answer for you. And now what happens afterwards, and I'll just say, I can't find the settings. I'll just say something random. What's going to happen afterwards is once it suggests some responses, it's actually just going to take you to the most relevant requests that you should be submitting. And once it generates a response, should just take another moment here. You don't have to go through and figure out which request group, which request type, figuring out which fields and all that. Service Agent will just let you know, hey, here's exactly what you need to do. If you can't find or can't do it on your own, here is a link to submit your request immediately. That way you know exactly what you need to submit, exactly what you should be doing, and it's very easy from your perspective. So it should just take a second, and I could kind of keep chatting with it for a minute here. And eventually it'll just take me to submitting a new IT request, which it just did here. So I just maybe took 2 minutes to go through, chat with agent, see if I could resolve this problem, and it just immediately opened a request for me, and I could click on that. And now we have a brand new request with the full information from the service agent relayed to the actual real live agent. That way they have every piece of context they need to immediately solve my problem. So instead of like going through each request type, finding each article, and then going through trying to add as much detail as possible, Virtual Assistant just kind of walks me through that process and makes it a little bit easier for me. And it's kind of a win-win for you because it's faster and easier, and it's a win for the agent because they get more context and information. And ideally, you actually solve a request without them, which makes your resolutions faster. So it's a win-win for both parties, and I highly, highly suggest using the Virtual Service Agent. So that's going to be your service agent in my recommended way if your team has that enabled. If not, you still have the search option all the time and all the other features that I showed off. Otherwise, Virtual Service Agent is kind of my go-to when I like to submit requests. So now that we have a request submitted, let's move on to the second piece of this, which is viewing submitted requests, either past closed ones or current open ones, communicating with the agent and kind of just seeing where the status is of those requests. So if I'm on this portal and I know I submitted something yesterday, I want to check in on how things are going, see if there's any progress, any comments, which all comments and chats and everything will also go through email, so you won't miss anything. Don't worry about that. And you could also respond via email. That being said, when you do receive a request via email or like a response or notification, there is a link to get to the portal. And I think the communication in the portal is a little bit better because it's actually like a chat, and you have, which I'll show you in a moment, more context and information on your request. So I actually suggest just going to the portal, clicking the link inside of your email, going to the portal, checking it out, seeing more context and information there. But if you're here already and you want to just see all of your open requests, all you have to do is hit the little icon on the top right. And there's going to be a couple of options, and your list will be shorter. It's because I'm an admin. I see a little bit more customization options. Really, all you need to worry about are requests and sometimes approvals if you're like a manager or someone who's providing an approval for like hardware or software access or building access or something else. So you may have approvals which also come via email. So don't worry, you won't miss any notifications. But for the most part, I would say 95% of the time, you're just going to be looking at your requests. So let's go to our requests. So when we're at this screen, we could see all of our previously submitted requests. And if I go to this little tab at the top, I can see all of my closed requests. And if I click that, I now see a bunch more things that I've previously opened that are now closed. And this is great for if I wanted to reference maybe something previous that I have already submitted and has been resolved. And maybe I don't remember what the solution was or what the agent told me to do in that particular moment. So I could actually jump in here, look at one of the closed ones, click on this, and we'll go over the screen in a second. And then we'll get all of the correspondence, the information with that agent, including all the details of that ticket. So we could go through and like actually see these particular items, whether they're closed or open or specific statuses if you'd like. I really find the most relevant ones are just these top two with open and closed. And by default, open, which makes the most sense, is going to be anything relevant that is still outstanding. Then we have like all are created by me or where I'm a participant. And this is going to be if someone shared a request with you. You can see specific requests that are not created by you that have been shared, relevant for maybe managers. But I find just to see all open requests a little bit cleaner, unless you have like a very long list and you want to just see the things that were shared with you. You also have request type, which essentially isn't very useful, especially if this is like a very long list of things. But if you wanted to see something very specific that you submitted and you have a very long list here of open requests, this may be relevant. You could just click through, apply some of these, and that'll pull up a specific list. My favorite is just really using open, close requests, and kind of leaving it at that. So when we see this list and when we actually submit a request, we can click on one of these, and that'll bring us directly to the screen that is going to open up and show all the details of our submitted request and everything, including the correspondence. And I'll run through exactly what some of these items are, but let me open up a little bit of a simpler one. So this is one that we actually submitted with Virtual Agent, and we could go through and action on from here. So the very top, we have the general summary or the general information on the task and what it is. And the agent actually sees the exact same thing. So when they click on it, they see the summary, and you see the summary here, as well as seeing the summary from this view if you'd like. And when you click on it, you'll typically show or see the details in this panel. Sometimes there's going to be a show or hide details button. Sometimes it'll just show it by default. But if you wanted to see the fields you submitted, the information that you provided, that can be done right in this middle section right here. And then before I go into like the actual activity panel, a couple more context fields on the right side. So we have the status. So whatever status your request is in, this could be like awaiting implementation, could be in progress, it could be resolved. That'll show up on the right. This notification button is specifically for emails, and any comment that you get, anything that happens that's like major, like a big status change, like resolved, you'll get a notification for it unless you're turning this off. By default, it's going to be on, and if you don't want them for some reason, toggle it off, you'll be good to go. Then you have the request type that was submitted with it, just for context, and a shared with panel. And here we can click on and share with anybody else inside of our organization, or really whoever your administrators allow. Sometimes this can be outside organization individuals, but most of the time it's just who's in your current organization. You drop in an email, you share it with them, and then they see the same view that you see. So maybe that's relevant for like a manager or someone who has a similar issue and you want to drop them into this request. Then we have some approvers, and I'll cover that in just a moment. For the most part, you won't see that. You'll see something that looks a little bit more like this. And then a couple of things that show up depending on the type of ticket you submit and the type of configuration that your agent has built out or your admins have built out are these toggles right here. And these allow you to like either resolve something, cancel, sometimes escalate. So just general actions that you'll see on a request that you can take. So let's say that I submitted this request and I just found out that I actually don't need it anymore. Maybe someone else on my team took care of it and I didn't need access to like this piece of software or whatever. Then I could go through and just cancel this request, and I could click on that, say, you know, whatever you need to, I don't need it anymore. And instead of just dropping a comment and kind of letting an agent take care of it, you just kind of drop in your comment and click on the action that you'd like, and you're good to go. So now cancels this request. You'll see the status changes. You'll see some comments added, automation responses, and that's how you know you're pretty much wrapped up and this ticket doesn't need to be addressed anymore. If I go back to this list, you'll see that it actually drops off my open requests. Because it is something that is closed and not open anymore, I don't need to reference it unless I specifically go to close requests, and I won't see it in my open requests list. Now, the last piece of this is your comments section. And this always goes to your email as well, but it's also available here on the portal. And I actually like using this a little bit more. And when you get any kind of notifications for these requests via email, you'll see a little link to view it in the portal, which will bring you to this page as well. But the correspondence via chat is a little bit better than email. It's a little bit less formal and like can be done a little bit quicker, add a little bit more context with rich text, and you could add file uploads here. So it's a little bit more convenient to use as a customer, especially if you're like wanting like a quick correspondence chat-like feel. So you might drop in a comment and say, what is the status of this request? If it's been a couple of days, or like, what is the ETA on this? That way you have some more context. But essentially the comments drop in just like this, and the agents will respond, and you'll see the agent responses in line right after yours. So it'll be sequential in order of date. So it's pretty much as simple as that. And you'll see this approver list, which is going to be pretty rare. And this is relevant for specifically mostly managers and directors. You'll see the approvals option. And if I click on that, you'll also get these approvals via email. But if you want to see them here, this is another option. And same as you would with the request, you click on it, it brings you to this screen, and you'll see one extra module right here, which is either to approve or decline a request. And if you have this, all you have to do is kind of skim the details, see if it looks good to you, or if you want to decline it, you could decline. And then based on your decision, you click one of these buttons, the information goes through, the Jira system takes over, your agents take over, and everything else is good to go once you hit the approval, unless you do need more input, which it should ping you if you do. Otherwise, if you just approve, all you need to do is hit that one button and you're done. So that's pretty much our full overview of open requests and how we manage those. Again, everything will be done via email as well. I really prefer using the portal because of the easy use cases and the way you could just jump in here, easily reference more information, chat with the agent a little bit better, tweak notifications, share it, makes things a little bit easier, makes life a little bit easier for myself as the customer in this scenario. So hopefully that helps and gives you all the context you need to start all the way from submitting a request, which is what we covered first, to once submitted, you see all of your requests in your request panel, and then referencing them if they're open, closed, or anything else. And if you have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out to our team. More than happy to help you out with anything outstanding that you may have or any other questions that you may have. Real quick, if you're having trouble implementing Jira and you want to work with a partner that's done it 100 times before and you're implementing Jira for the very first time and want to make sure you get it right, or migrating from another tool, or if you just want us to jump in and take a look at your current Atlassian environment to help give some suggestions on how you could be using it better, go ahead and book a strategy session with the first link down below. On that call, we'll go over your current Jira environment, and if it makes sense, we'll share exactly how we work with teams just like yours. See you there.